Cargo ships are sitting idle. Ports from Shanghai to California are jammed. Major retailers are canceling orders mid-transit. And China? It's quiet, but it's acting. This isn't your average trade dispute. What you're seeing is a precision-engineered disruption of America's supply chains. And where does it hurt the most? At your local store, in your next car payment, and across nearly every American industry that depends on imports. On April 3, 2025, Chinese authorities quietly instructed all state-linked airlines to halt new Boeing deliveries indefinitely. There were no press conferences, no public accusations, just silence. And in that silence, Boeing lost $28.4 billion in market value within 48 hours. According to Bloomberg, 84 aircraft scheduled for the second and third quarter delivery, including 737s and 787 Dreamliners, were suddenly frozen. These were not just planes, they were orders Boeing was counting on to stabilize its post-pandemic backlog. But this wasn't about the airplanes themselves. A leaked memo from China's Ministry of Commerce, reported by the South China Morning Post, showed this move was a calculated response to escalating U.S. tariffs. Boeing, long considered a crown jewel of American exports, was suddenly facing its sharpest international setback in 2 decades. Scott Kennedy from CSIS said, "This isn't just a trade move, it's a pressure campaign aimed at a vulnerable U.S. symbol." Meanwhile, Airbus shares surged 11.2% in Frankfurt as Chinese airlines shifted their orders. So why Boeing first? Because in trade wars, symbolism matters. Boeing represents American industrial power, technological dominance, and global prestige. The message wasn't shouted, it was implied: escalate tariffs, and your weak points will be targeted. And yet, this tactical freeze on planes was only the opening move. On April 1st, the U.S. government triggered a 145% import tariff on more than $300 billion in Chinese goods. The Wall Street Journal called it a policy weapon turned into a wrecking ball. By April 4th, marine traffic data revealed outbound shipments from China to the U.S. had dropped 47% week over week. Shanghai International Port reported over 71,000 containers stranded, some sitting for more than 10 days. West Coast ports began to buckle under the pressure. At the Port of Los Angeles, berth congestion reached levels not seen since the 2021 pandemic surge. 27 vessels were waiting offshore, with unloading delays averaging 96 hours. Shipping costs skyrocketed. A 40-foot container from China to Long Beach went from $1,950 to $6,820 in just 10 days. A 250% increase according to the Baltic Index. But it's not just congestion, it's the decisions behind it. Chinese shippers started pausing contracts mid-negotiation, citing tariff instability. Zhang Qiang, a director at Sotrans Logistics, explained, "You can't price a shipment when the rules keep changing mid-ocean. The U.S. tried to pressure Beijing but ended up choking its own trade arteries. Once cargo stops moving, the effects ripple far beyond ports." By April 6th, China's top 5 freight forwarders suspended most U.S.-bound bookings, citing liability from retroactive tariffs. Exporters were caught in a catch-22 ship under unpredictable conditions or absorbed losses they couldn't recover. The consequences reached factories. In Dongguan, a city responsible for nearly 8% of China's electronics exports, more than 1,200 small factories were reported idle by April 10th. One supplier shared, "Our goods are packaged, labeled, and sitting in port, but the freight company canceled. We don't even know if they'll move this month." This isn't theoretical. U.S. Customs data from the first half of April shows a 34% plunge in inbound shipments from China compared to March. On American store shelves, it may still look normal, but the vacuum has already begun forming. And it's not only small packages that are disappearing. The disruption is hitting major retailers hard. On April 7th, internal memos at a leading U.S. retailer advised sellers to pause all incoming shipments from China while tariffs and warehouse space were reassessed. Just 36 hours later, The company confirmed it canceled over $67 million in orders already in transit, about 11% of its second quarter inventory flow. CEO Joel Anderson explained during an April 9th earnings call, "We couldn't justify paying 3 times the landed cost on items already under margin pressure. This is more than numbers on a spreadsheet. It's a panic reaction from companies that rely on low-cost, high-volume cycles. Every decision here reverberates through manufacturing, logistics, retail, and ultimately to the consumer. For Americans, the impact might not be immediately visible in stores, but it is already in motion. From electronics to toys, household goods to fashion, products are caught in limbo. When supply chains seize up, it's not just companies that suffer, it's everyone in the chain: factory workers, freight forwarders, retailers, and ultimately, you at the checkout counter." The silent, calculated moves by China show the power of leverage in global trade. Boeing freezes, ports clogged, shipments delayed, tariffs enforced. It's a domino effect designed to target vulnerabilities without firing a single shot. And while policymakers debate, ordinary consumers and businesses face the real-world consequences. This is the reality of modern trade wars. Precision strikes instead of open conflict, indirect pressure instead of headlines, and disruption that reaches every corner of daily life. By April 11th, Ford's plant in Wayne, Michigan, halted assembly on its flagship F-150 Lightning because, well, microcontrollers from Shenzhen never arrived. GM's battery module production in Spring Hill, Tennessee, slowed by 60% due to missing capacitors and inverter components. AutoCast Solutions reports that nearly 41,000 vehicles were lost in U.S. production during the second week of April alone, amounting to $1.6 billion in delayed revenue. Stellantis warned that supply chain constraints linked to tariffs are likely to affect output through June. The auto sector doesn't run on weeks, it runs on hours. Missing just one part can send 2,000 workers home. "You can't run a modern assembly line without a $12 chip," said Kristen Zichek, policy analyst with the Center for Automotive Research. Despite diversification efforts, the average U.S.-built vehicle still contains at least 24 components sourced from China. With freight delays compounding daily, some plants have started cannibalizing units for parts, a practice not seen since early COVID disruptions. But this isn't a pandemic. It's geopolitical strategy. If the White House can't stabilize imports, the next auto shortage may not be temporary. It may be structural. Between April 1st and 14th, shipping a 40-foot container from China to the U.S. surged from $2,000 to over $7,300. According to the Baltic Index, this spike is now hitting every layer of auto pricing. Stellantis, which imports over 23% of its EV components from China, raised average dealer prices on plug-in hybrids 6 to 8% in 1 week, citing unrecoverable transport volatility. The Ford Mustang Mach-E saw a $1,200 MSRP increase after freight contracts were renegotiated mid-transit. Even used vehicles aren't immune. Cox Automotive reported wholesale prices up 4.1% week over week in mid-April, the sharpest jump since the 2021 chip crisis. This isn't random inflation. It's logistics turned into leverage. Every delay, every price hike, every missing part is a direct byproduct of rerouted cargo and tariff confusion. U.S. dealerships are beginning to reduce inventory by as much as 30% to avoid absorbing inflated costs. According to an April 17th survey, if you thought sticker shock peaked during the pandemic, brace yourself. This is what pricing looks like when supply chains are deliberately disrupted. Can these price pressures even be reversed? Or is this the new normal in a fractured trade world? On paper, shifting production from China to friendlier trade zones seems like a solution, but in reality, it's chaos. In Vietnam, ports at Haiphong and Cat Lai hit 94% capacity by April 12th, delaying shipments up to 6 days. India's logistics system, still reliant on road transit for over 60% of freight, slows deliveries almost twice as long as China's integrated rail model. In Mexico, companies collide with bottlenecks at the U.S. border. Average commercial vehicle wait times at Laredo jumped from 4.2 to 12.5 hours in April. Tesla, which moved battery assembly to Nuevo Leon in 2024, is now quietly leasing emergency warehouse space in Arizona to handle congestion. Apple's shift to Tamil Nadu has yielded mixed results, with defect rates from new suppliers 14% higher than Shenzhen equivalents. So yes, factories are moving, but replacement isn't seamless. When speed, precision, and cost collide, these new partners aren't just filling China's shoes, they're revealing new fault lines. Maybe this isn't substitution, it's fragmentation. On April 12th, Beijing restricted exports of dysprosium and terbium, rare earths critical for EV motors and aircraft targeting systems. This came just 11 days after the 145% U.S. tariff announcement. The U.S. relies on China for 78% of its rare earth imports, and the consequences were immediate. Lockheed Martin warned lead times on missile guidance units could stretch from 14 to 22 weeks. Ford announced delays on 2 EV lines, the Transit van and F-150 Lightning, due to shortages of high-strength magnets. Defense contractors are scrambling, lobbying for fast-track permits to source rare earths from Australia and Canada. But alternatives won't fully ramp up until late 2026. Beijing hasn't blocked everything, just enough to remind Washington who controls the valves. GM's EVP Doug Parks admitted on April 15th, "There's no substitute fast enough or cheap enough to replace what we're now cut off from. This was a surgical choke, targeting sectors too slow to pivot and too strategic to lose." Auto production isn't bouncing back, it's rerouting. Tesla is accelerating Model 3 assembly in Berlin, bypassing US-bound parts entirely. Toyota is redesigning 2026 hybrid models to reduce semiconductor reliance by 30%. Stellantis plans an all-Mexico production run for several U.S. models until the tariff map stabilizes. But these changes come at a cost. New platforms, logistics contracts, and labor agreements are inflating development timelines by 4 to 6 months. For consumers, that means fewer discounts, longer wait times, and more stripped-down configurations. J.D. Power's April report found average new car prices in the U.S. rose to $47,770, up $2,600 from March alone. For automakers, this is now the only path forward. If China is no longer reliable and replacements can't scale fast enough, the global auto industry isn't just shifting, it's fragmenting. But the real story isn't just about factories or automakers. It's about the road you drive on. This isn't a supply chain crunch. It's a controlled demolition of globalization's most profitable routes. Detroit to Shenzhen and everywhere in between, the rulebook is being rewritten in real time. And if you think the US-China shipping freeze is the final chapter, think again. Something bigger is brewing, not in ports or car lots, but in the bond markets. Foreign holdings of U.S. treasuries just fell to their lowest level since 2011. Beijing isn't just blocking goods, it's quietly offloading debt. And if China decides to act on the dollar itself, that's the next major fault line, and we're walking straight across it.